Hello, I'm Gwen Hill from Pine Ridge Baptist Church Ladies Class, Sunday School Department, and we are in the book of Daniel, doing a study of the book of Daniel. Last time we met, we studied Daniel chapter 1 through the verse of 17, and we will be taking up with verse 18 this morning. To recap just a little bit so you'll know where we're at if you're coming in fresh, Nebuchadnezzar has overrun and taken Jerusalem. He has taken approximately 10,000 of the finest that Israel had to offer. He has taken implements out of the temple. He has also taken the nobility, the young men in the nobility class and the royal class of folks. They're expected leaders for the next generation, and he has taken them to Babylon, where he has further willowed them down to, we know the names of 4 of the young Hebrew men there, to integrate them into the Babylonian lifestyle, to make them forget that they are Hebrews. And it has been a very big challenge to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. They have gained permission to not follow the dietary laws of Babylon, but to follow the dietary laws of their God, in their Israel, Jehovah God. And they have thrived. And I'm going to reread verse 17, and this is talking about how God has blessed these young men while they were in exile. Being in exile, away from your family, being away from your home, being away from everything that made you who you were and put you in a hostile place, in a language that wasn't your first native language, in a place where you were hostages and where you were expected to embrace that lifestyle, which is totally foreign to you. God has been with these 4 young men. Let's read chapter 1, verse 17. And for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. In other words, they may have been in bondage. They may have been in a program that is like brainwashing to us, to have them to forget where they came from, to forget their God, and to embrace the Babylonian lifestyle. God has been with them, and he has blessed them. He has blessed them to be able to retain knowledge, to gain knowledge, to have a fluency with languages, to have concepts, the Babylonian concepts given to them that they can understand easily. And that would win the hearts of their instructors. Every instructor loves to have a good student. It not only challenges the teacher and inspires the teacher, but you get to see the benefits of it, and it's wonderful to see. And so they are in a 3-year schooling, and they're at the end of it. And today we're going to see the final exam. In this portion of chapter, you're going to see these 4 young men have to come before King Nebuchadnezzar himself. This would be huge. You want to put yourself in the mindset of back then. King Nebuchadnezzar was young. He wasn't much older, just a few years older than these young Hebrew boys. But he was brilliant. And he was also egotistical and arrogant. And he was very much aware of his power. Nebuchadnezzar called these young boys, these young men, into his accounting room. I don't know if that would be in a comfortable part of his castle, or if it would be in a chamber where there would be people lining the walls and listening and watching. I do believe that he had men around him for his own safety. There would be bodyguards there. There may have been the mentors, the people who were supposed to be in charge of teaching these young men so that they could bask in the glory or be held accountable if the young men didn't perform as well as Nebuchadnezzar thought they should have. It would have been a very stressful time to the Hebrew children, young men, as well as everyone around. The only one that could have been at ease would have been Nebuchadnezzar himself. In verse 18, then at the end of the days, that was their schooling, their 3 years, at the end of the days which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. Can you see this man? This captain of the guard. He's going to present them to Nebuchadnezzar. He has been part of their training, and he would have wanted them to make the very best impression, because he was going to be judged by how well they did. They would have been attired in the appropriate clothing. They would have been rested from the day before. They would have been coached as much as possible in what Nebuchadnezzar may ask them. And they were as prepared as the king's officials could make them. And here they are, coming through the door to meet Nebuchadnezzar. In verse 19, the king talked with them, and out of them all not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. We're not told how many young men were brought before to see how well their education, their re-education had gone. But we do know the phrasing, out of them all, these 4 were bright and shiny. They were exactly what King Nebuchadnezzar wanted to see in young men who would now enter his service. In verse 20, as for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all of the magicians and conjurers who were in all of his realm. 10 times better. Doesn't mean there was actually a numeric way of counting that they were 10 times better. It is a hyperbole telling you that of all the ones that were there, they were the best of the best. And if no one else had the answer, one of these 3 boys had the answer. If no one else could grasp the concept that Nebuchadnezzar put forward, one of these boys would. Remember, you're talking to who was the prince of the realm. His dad, Nebuchadnezzar's dad, had been the king, and he had sent his son through the best of the best to be educated. And now Nebuchadnezzar was king. His dad had died, and he had assumed the throne. This is one smart, worldwide, the world that he knew it, ruler. And he has asked them questions. I wasn't privy to the questions, and it's not written in our scripture what the questions would be. But you can look at the captions, how he said that they, out of all the literature, all of the, what would it be inside the literature that they would read on it? They were great builders. So architectural things, accounting things, how to read other languages in their time, because they were always having to write treaties and laws and things of that nature. And Nebuchadnezzar knew all of this, and he wanted to make sure the men under him were just as versed. He even wanted to know that they were better. They thought critically, that they thought logistically, that they could be trusted as well. But they were better than anybody that already worked for him, that already surrounded him. They gave him concise answers. They gave him correct answers. They were thought-provoking to him, and they did it in the correct manner. They did not puff themselves up or anything of that nature. They were very straightforward, and it was wonderful. He was very highly impressed. In verse 21, this is a little bit out of character, this verse, where it's at, because it skips a lot. All of a sudden, you go from this young man who is having to do his oral thesis, if you would, in front of King Nebuchadnezzar, to the end of his life, because verse 21 says, and Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. Some of the commentaries that I looked up and read about, they think that Daniel was probably around the age of 83 or 84 when Cyrus became king. So this one verse tells you that he stayed in Babylon. He stayed in Babylon. He continued there until Cyrus the king. Chapter 2, verse 1. This is later, and we don't know if it's a week later, a day later, or if it is, in essence, a year or two later. I tend, in most of your commentaries that I have read, tend to believe that this happened fairly soon after their ordination, after their time in front of Nebuchadnezzar to prove themselves. It says, now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. I want to stop just right because it says the second year of the reign. He actually co-reigned with his father for a while when he captured Jerusalem in the time that Daniel and his friends were pulled out. He was actually a co-reign because his father was still alive, but he was called, instead of calling him Prince Nebuchadnezzar, they called him King, but they knew he was a co-reigner until his father died. And then and it happened just soon after his first time of taking Jerusalem. He rushed back when he got news that his father had died unexpectedly to make sure that he had the reign of Babylon in his hand. And so when it says the second year of his reign, don't let that throw you. He's been reigning. This is just within the second year. And they didn't start counting years until 1 year was complete. So in our days, this is not the way they counted time, but in the way we count time, from January 1 to December 31st, would not have counted as a year, okay? Because that's year zero, or that's within the first year. So his first year was over with January the 1st the next year. So that's when his first year would be counted. So he's in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. Notice the S on that he's having dreams, not just one. And his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. He was having a dream that would wake him up in the middle of the night. And he would calm himself and maybe go back to sleep, only to be reawakened with it again. Now, how often did he have these dreams, and how many of these dreams did he have? I don't know. It could have been one a night for the last 3 or 4 nights. It could have been multiple times during a single night. I don't know, but it's multiple dreams, and they're all the same, and they're waking him up every time until he's almost afraid to go to sleep. It's such a puzzling dream, and he wants to know the meaning of it, and it's preying and weighing on his mind. Verse 2, then King Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. We don't know what time of night or day it was. Bible doesn't say. But it had interrupted his sleep, and then he called for them. In my imagination, I think of it like in the middle of the night, like 1:30, 2 o'clock. in the morning. He wakens for maybe the second or third or fourth time, and his heart is pounding and his breath is quick because he's anxious. Remember, this most powerful king is also a human being, and he is experiencing an adrenaline rush from these dreams that he's having that he can't understand what they're about. But he has the knowledge that these dreams are important to him and to his people. So what do you do when you're the most powerful person in the world? Well, you've got a lot of men under your financial belt that are there to be your advisors. Wouldn't it be natural for you to call upon them to help you understand what this dream meant? They put great store in their dreams in this time in the world. And he knew that these dreams were important, that they meant something, but it just couldn't come to him. So he wanted to get the men that he had on hire, that was their job, was to solve hard problems. So in verse 2, he gave orders to call them all in. Can you imagine if you were a Chaldean, one of their conjurers, and you were asleep in the bed and you heard on the door, get up, the king has need of you. Brush the sleep from your eye. You don't even have time to change into your costly garments. You just grab a coat to put over and go to where the king is at. And they, in verse 3, the Chaldeans came before the king to tell him his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. They're all surrounding the bedchamber with the king, a very agitated, very powerfully high-tempered man was there waiting for them to arrive. He had a question for them, and they don't know what is fixing to go down. Can you see them kind of looking at one another and chattering and trying to figure out, well, why are we here? What are we doing? All right, they come and they stood before the king, and the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand that dream. I've had a dream, and I know in my heart of hearts that there is something very important about these dreams. This dream has something to do with my functioning as king, my functioning as a ruler, and I need to know what it means. What is this dream trying to tell me? In verse 4, the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. This was the language that was the most prevalent in the Chaldean world at that time. O king, live forever. This is a salutation that they used. It doesn't matter what you thought in your heart. It's kind of like us extending our hand, shaking a hand, someone saying, good morning, how are you? It's about as deep as the meaning went too. O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. Well, the Chaldeans said, we know how to interpret dreams. We've studied dreams. We have books laden with instructions on how to interpret dreams. If you dream of a black dog or a blue bird or a field of clover, all of those have certain meanings. And if you'll just share with us what your dream is, I'm sure we can figure out what it means. And their king replied to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. See those Chaldeans looking at one another? See those Chaldeans have such a questioning look on their eye? Did we understand what he said? Did he understand what he said? We're here to interpret the dream. you're supposed to tell us the dream, and then we interpret it. We don't tell you what the dream was. There are a lot of commentators here that will tell you that the king knew what he dreamed, and he's testing them. Then you will have a lot of commentators tell you that he actually forgot what the dream was. He only had the feeling of anxiety. He only knew how important it was. And just like you and I do sometimes, we may forget something, but remember it when we hear it, or remember it when we see it. But nevertheless, he told his conjurers, I've had a terrible dream. I'm very anxious about it. I know it's important. I have to know both the dream and the interpretation. And I believe I can trust the interpretation if you can tell me the dream. I think he knew. I think he knew what the dream was. I think he was sharp enough and smart enough to know that if he told them what the dream was, they in turn could tell him anything they wanted to about the interpretation. But if he compelled them to tell him the dream first, he could trust the interpretation. But he is a very physical and a very dictatorial man. He says, and if you don't, I will tear you limb from limb, and I will make your homes a rubbish pile. What he actually said right then is, I will torture you to death, and I will kill your whole family. That's exactly what he said to them. That's the way they would have interpreted it. And the king continues in verse 6. He says, but if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. He said, but there's an upside. If you tell me the dream, and if you tell me what it means, I will reward you beyond your dreams, beyond your imagination. And they answered a second time in verse 7. And they said, let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation. Can't you just see them looking one to another and nodding their head and go, yeah, this is not logical what he's asking us to do. This is not possible. We cannot tell him his dream. What? How does that work? How does he think that works? He's like a child having a tantrum here. We need to break through to him that what he's asking is impossible. And they're fearful. You see, this man is very cruel at times. And this man has already done horrific things to people who crossed him. And he has all the power in the world. He is the world's leading or only dictator at this time. He can do and say and make happen anything that he chooses to do. In verse 8, the king replied, I know for certain that you're bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. He's getting more and more anxious. He's getting more and more angry. He has seen the looks that they shared with one another. He has heard them as they decreed, we can't do this. You're being unreasonable. He doesn't like to hear that. This man doesn't like to hear anything that borders on the word no. And he's saying, you're just wanting time. You're just killing time, hoping that my anxiety will fade and that I'll forget this and it'll all go away. Not going to happen, boys. Not going to happen. In verse 10, the Chaldeans answered the king And they said, there's not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. You're breaking new ground here, Nebuchadnezzar. Oh, king, this is so outlandish. This has never been asked from a man in our positions. You're being unreasonable. You don't tell an angry king that he's being unreasonable. Did you know that that's guaranteed not to make your project successful? And the king said, I know what you want to do. You just want more time. And I'm not going to give you more time. Verse 11, moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there's no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. They just got through saying no one on earth could do this. No man on earth could do this. And they said, the only entities that could do this for you would be the gods, and they're not here on earth. They don't dwell here on earth. They're not concerned with mortal flesh. You need to understand that. And the king's looking at these men who are supposed to be go-betweens between him and his gods, his Babylonian gods. And they're telling him that these gods are not available. Verse 12, because of this, the king became indignant and very furious, and he gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Well, they've told him they couldn't do what he asked, so he's going to do away with them. Now, when we start forward from here, some commentators think that maybe they were commandeered and placed in a room and were all going to be killed at one time, or that they started immediately and they killed the ones that were in that room. But that's a large sect of their population. Remember, the men from Jerusalem are Hebrew boys. Those 4 had just gone through a school of 3 years to learn the duties of this and had just newly graduated. They're listed in that sect. We don't know how many, but there's a lot of them. And they're not all killed at once, but it's sad. This king is so angry. He is so angry. In verse 13, so the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. The captain of the guard remembers the class that had just finished recently, and he remembers Daniel and his 3 friends and the wisdom that they had, and he himself went to look for Daniel. I think he was looking for a way to avert disaster and bloodshed. But he was looking for Daniel and his friends to kill them. He had a decree from the king. Not to follow the decree meant the end of his life. But he was willing to risk it here for a moment. Then Daniel, he found Daniel. And then Daniel replied, this is verse 14, replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. And he said to Arioch, the king's commander, for what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? This is the middle of the night, early morning. Arioch, what has happened in the palace? Why is the king so upset? And I think Arioch is very aware of what's been going on, and he shares with Daniel. Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter, and in chapter 16, verse 16, so Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. He convinced Arioch to take him to see King Nebuchadnezzar. This was a miracle. This was God's hand. Because what did the magicians want? They wanted time. They asked for time. And Nebuchadnezzar said, absolutely not. I don't know how much time has elapsed here, whether it's minutes or hours, but God, Jehovah God, has stirred Nebuchadnezzar's heart. He has turned him just ever so slightly to where Nebuchadnezzar's had time to take a deep breath. And when he sees and hears that Daniel wants to speak with him, he remembers Daniel as the very much wise young man that he had just interviewed some time before. And he agrees to let Daniel come into his chamber. A miracle again, okay? God is so evident here. He is causing things to happen that it is amazing. And he listens to Daniel and agrees to give Daniel some time. Okay, that's the end of today. Next time we talk, we'll start on verse 17 of the 2nd chapter, and we'll see what does Daniel do with the time that Nebuchadnezzar has granted to him. God bless you.